Let's get this final plenary started. It has been quite the European Climate Summit. And I just, before we start, taking moderator privilege, but also being a part of the AIDA team, I want to thank, obviously, all of you for joining us over the last 3 packed days. I think our final numbers of registrants came to north of 600 people. That's certainly a record breaker for AIDA's European Summit. Also, just a real special, heartfelt thanks to AIDA staff who make this happen. It is not a weeks-long, It's not a weeks-long effort, even a couple of months. This takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. And Katie, being at AIDA and knowing how much effort goes on behind the scenes, we just really appreciate the whole team bringing us all together. And we hope that you have garnered a lot of value, both in terms of substance on these programs, but also in terms of the networking, seeing usual faces, familiar faces, but also meeting a lot of new faces. So obviously markets, but removals, CCUS, they've come up across the board, across this program over the last couple of days. We're going to, though, solely focus on this topic in both the European and the international context over the next hour. If you've known me, I apologize in advance, because I say this every now and then, but way back in the day, probably when I first met Paul, when we were working alongside the tribe around the UNFCCC and Kyoto, it was about the CCS methodology under the CDM. And there was a Durban COP where we had a session like this. And we called it, "You Can't Spell Success Without CCS." And then, fast forward a little bit, and it still works. You can't spell success without CCUS. The R I'm still working on for that. So we'll get into this, the hat trick, industrial decarbonization solutions. We'll look at the use cases, accounting questions, CRCF, NZIA. There's a whole host of question marks related to how markets are or could be used to drive removals and CCUS at the scale we need in order to reach our targets both across Europe but also globally. And I am so privileged to be joined by some of the leading experts and brains in this space. It's across industry, it's across industry representation broadly, the hard-to-abate sector, it's across standards, and it's across just technical experts who have been involved in this space for many, many moons. So what I'll do is start off, well, very quickly. We have Paul Zakur from Carbon Counts. We have Helen Bray from Pure Earth. We have Marcus Becker from no longer G, Vernova, right? You'll tell us more about that. We have Nicola Rega from SIPA, chemicals industry, big. As many of you would know Nicola and the work he's done in this space for many years. And last but not least, we have David Unger from Carbon Finance Lab. So Paul, I'll ask you to start us off, maybe setting the stage around the good, the opportunities we are seeing, primarily going to focus on Brussels and Europe a bit, but also some of the more, say, looming challenges and big question marks that we're seeing around the CCUS and removal space.
Yeah, thanks, Katie, and thanks to AIDA for the invitation to talk on this panel today. It's a real privilege to be here and see so many familiar and less familiar faces in the room. So I'm going to try, well, we got this hat trick title, and I'm going to try not to strangle the analog or the idiom too much, but I think we know what the target is, and actually, luckily, the lady, Madam Substa Chair, in the previous session made it very clear that the target is how do we get private finance or use public policy to leverage private finance into these climate-critical technologies that are going to deliver us to zero in net zero. And I think until we sort of get that clear in our head that it's not just public finance that's going to do this, we need the power and the deep pockets of the private sector and the skills and resources to be mobilized in this journey and in this task. And I think when we look at Europe and the landscape in Europe, we can see three clear goals that are sitting there and three great opportunities that Europe's created in public policy. The first one is the carbon removal certification framework. This is giving a signal that it's putting on the political footing around carbon removal being a necessary and timely solution for Europe to meet its targets. And I guess that's a goal really for David and Helen in their roles. Then we see also the European Commission putting carbon capture and use into the ETS in a systematic way, and that's going to be very important for goals for Nicola and his companies and who want to use carbon to make it into different types of products, particularly in the chemical sector. And the third goal, I would say, is the Net Zero Industry Act, which is proving that we don't need just one type of market, but there are other types of mechanisms and incentives we can create for doing these CCS and CDR technologies by delivering the infrastructure for storage that's much needed. And this is in the Article 18 of the Net Zero Industry Act, which is putting an obligation on oil and gas producers to develop proven storage capacity of 50 million tons by 2030, for those that don't know. And I think this is a big opportunity for the private sector to crowd in private finance to build not just the capture plant, which we can get paid for under carbon markets, but also the storage sites that are going to be needed to take that CO2 and put it in the ground and hold it there for meaningful periods of time. So we've got three key goals that are being delivered, but unfortunately there's probably three own goals sitting in amongst this as well, which aren't delivering, and these are more the challenging areas for the Commission on Europe to address. The first one is we have a carbon removal certification framework, but we don't know what it's for because we don't know what we can use these certificates for, which is creates a difficult tension in discussing what is a good quality methodology, what's a good quality project. Well, the quality is a little bit defined by how we're going to actually use those credits at the end of the day. So I think that's a big looming challenge that the Commission seems unwilling to fully address. And leading on from that is a little bit around the accounting. There seems to be a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of different interpretations about how carbon removals that happen in Europe can actually be accounted for by the countries and the companies that are undertaking these activities, and whether there's a shared benefit or these are mutually inseparable rights. And I think there's a lot of unhelpful dialogue happening around this at the minute that probably needs to be cleaned up so we will have a much clearer vision of who's going to be able to lay claim to what. And the third own goal in there is exactly that, the claims. All of this is bundling up into what is an allowable claim for what I've done. I've undertaken an activity, can I claim something for it? I've sold the credits for that, can I make a claim on that? I'm hosting that, can I claim it as a reduction or removal in my inventory? And all of these things are being sort of mashed up in a discourse that's looking slightly unstructured at the minute. And I think the Commission and IETA as a group, and I talk about all of us in this room, need to bring some sense and clarity to this discussion. So yeah, just on the hat-trick side, we've got 3 pluses, but also 3 minuses. So I'd say we're about even Stevens on 3 all at the current time. So I'll see what else my panelists can make of it. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Paul. And I think that's a great way to set the scene. I'm going to go to Nicola, being involved again on behalf of the hard-to-abate sector with the chemicals industry, and I think you've been in that role for a couple of years now, but you've been in the space, obviously, in Europe, Brussels, climate, energy for many, many years. How is the industry, at least, positioning itself with the CCU? I know you lean quite heavily into the use piece, but also the linkage to possibly the EU ETS, right?
Yeah, so thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a great pleasure to be back in IETA context. It's been a while, and congratulations again for happy birthday for your anniversary. Now, let me, I've been here the last couple of days, jump in and out sessions, and perhaps I've been listening to what many of you have been saying, and maybe one thing that I'd like to stress that is anticipating all the other points is try to help understanding also for the audience which is not following that much the European elements and what I've been going through over the past couple of decades. We have an ETS in place, working, been tinkered many times, perhaps way too many times. But the thing is, we have been, up until now, we have done, I would say, the easy part. The easy part meaning that the ETS was putting a price on carbon, high energy costs, that created an incentive for accelerating investments, primarily in energy efficiency improvements and a bit of fuel switching, but mostly energy efficiency. Something for which there was a clear return on investment. Could have been a short time, long time. People might not be happy to anticipate investments, but at least there was a business case. Now we're entering into a new phase where most of the solutions, except for one exception, but all the other solutions that help us in going towards deep decarbonization, they entitle higher OPEX, and B, they require infrastructures, which is something that is not within the control of the industrial side. Those two together makes the investment or the return on investment non-existing. So what would it be required to get this return on investment working that would then unlock everything else following around? Well, first of all, we need a market for these low carbon products. At the moment, this market is not there. And that brings the question then, how do you bring the business case? If there is no market where you can, when the consumers are going to pay for these decarbonized products, then you need to have subsidies which are covering the delta. But the question is, how far can we go in subsidies? And then there's a bit of the discussion of what kind of transition are we envisaging. That is the fundamental elements, because if you don't have that market element, then how do you explain all the steps in between? And then brings to the next question, or the next issue that is on the table. We have a number of sectors, including starting with the chemical industry, where emissions are unavoidable. And that is because of what is usually called process emissions. In our case, it's fuel emissions coming from the cracking of fossil fuels. Those emissions are there, and the most efficient way of dealing with them is to capture them before they're released in the atmosphere. So carbon capture in the first step, but then what do we do with those molecules? And again, there are a lot of projects in how to valorize this CO2, so carbon capture and use, creating new molecules. In our industry, basic chemicals, organic chemistry, it's all about carbon and something else. Carbon and hydrogen mixed together. So we need carbon molecules for whatever we want to do in terms of organic chemistry, but capturing CO2 has cost. Then coupling carbon molecules with hydrogen means that we need to produce hydrogen in the first place, and it has cost. And then we need to build them, bundle them together, and there's additional cost, all energy costs. So there are embedded elements that are going there, which makes it, again, the business case not existing. So how do we build a market where these products are there? And fundamentally, we're not too far from that concept, because we are used to look at the carbon market in a linear way, which is, there is fossil fuels extracted from the ground, used, combustion, emissions. But the rest of the economy, at least in Europe, we are talking a lot about the circular economy. And there is no way that forbids the carbon economy not to become circular in the thinking. That helps a lot in, if you start bundling the two concepts together, then we can start also see possibilities for CCU. But CCU, again, we need to see what are the applications, because there are also, then we start having a competition between different molecules that are going to circular economy. There is a CCU route, there is also chemical recycling, where we are avoiding the molecules to be used in combustion and end of life. So there are a lot of different circular we need to start building around. In that frame, we need to also make sure that our balance is in place when it comes to emissions. And that's why, although the work is definitely encouraging a CCU element, it doesn't address all the problems. So the CCS element is still there, needs to be there, part of the discussion. And then brings to the last point, which is last point in my argument, but it's not last at all. It's the removals part. We have received a couple of months ago the document from the Commission looking at 2040. Now, in the best case scenario, in getting to 2040 when we will have emissions reduced by 90%. In the best case scenario, which means for industry that we will have all infrastructures in place for us, that we will have cost competitive energy prices, and we will have investments stepping up by a factor of 6 compared with our average investments over the past 10 years. If all these conditions are in place, we will still have residual emissions in the system, with an ETS going to 0 in 2039. So there is a clear mismatch, and that's where we need to discuss about removals. We cannot just ignore that there is a problem. Otherwise, there will be fundamentally no investments moving forward in the next decade, because if you don't have the absolute certainty that you can get to the absolute 0 emissions in 2030, why are you going to make any investment in the next years?
So, I was going to go back this way, but actually you teed that up perfectly based on a discussion I was having earlier with David. I mean, Nicola touched on a lot of points, and where David sits, it's not just Carbon Finance Lab working with 1.5, there's Oxy, and you are living the US context right now. And I think it's worthwhile highlighting some of the very real differences we're seeing on the US side versus Europe, and some of the major investments that you're currently making in plants, you company. But also that point about, in the Europe context, 2040, around the corner, we got to go negative and fast, and these early signals have to occur like yesterday. So, do you want to take the mic?
You started with the can't spell success without CCUS. In this industry, you can't spell success without the US. And, okay. I don't want to wave the flag too much, but when you look at this industry, I think it's really, really important to remove all discriminatory elements or efforts. In the various attributes we are creating, as 2 days ago we heard it from the creator of the EU ETS, the various regimes should recognize each other, even if we don't have a global carbon price. So I think it would be really important to help. It would really help the market and the various objectives if we allow instruments to come in from different jurisdictions outside of the European Union, especially when that can make it more affordable until the infrastructure can get ready and to gear up. And this is, I think, a very important. We are in a race to actually putting all the infrastructure elements from methodologies, MRVs, everything that we can be ready for this onslaught, which can be addressed only with removals and together with the other instruments on a shorter-term problems. Because as my colleague and partner, Nick Ogert, usually say, the safety valve of the NDCs and the future commitments are the removal credits, because that's what will be able to address the shortcomings which we are going to face. And when I looked at a lot of the various subsidies which are available in Europe to develop projects, and not just in Europe, but generally around the world, is focuses on the capital expenditures. But these businesses, which are very, very complex, are partially CapEx and largely OpEx. And the only market really addresses that with their subsidies is the US, with the 45Qs and so on. So if today, it's half jokingly, I can say that if you choose an American instrument, you're getting a $185 gift certificate with every ton you are actually obtaining. And we need that $185 to make it affordable and give time globally for this industry to grow. This is a very long-term development. We need the demand creation, as you pointed out, and then the private capital can respond. If you look at some of the investments which my parent organization is making with the private capital, and some of our esteemed competition who is doing great things from Iceland to many parts, they are trying to mobilize it. This is very, very important, because that's the only way we can expand the tribe.
Valuable insights, David. And for the record, I'm Canadian, not American. I just saying. But I mean, there's 45Q, low carbon fuel standard, right? In California, they're in the throes, in similar ways, obviously not identical, of developing a massive program for CDR CCS in California. Will it or will it not fall under EU California emissions trading system as compliance, right? Big question marks over there. It's kind of happening in the Sacramento zone. Yeah.
Just one thing, the LCFS allows credits from anywhere on the planet.
It does.
So this is a very good precedent. Just.
So Helen, hi.
Hi.
You've been in this space for a long time, but have been at Puro for quite a while now. You're also beyond Puro and being leading removals standard developer globally. You can tell us a bit more about that, but you also play that role as the chair of IETA's EU removals task force, tracking everything. I mean, CORSIA, ICVCM, obviously on the VCM side, the claim situation, accounting stuff, but also certainly CRCF and what is happening in Europe. So from your perch, what are you seeing, again, as like progress that's being made, some exciting parts, but also some of the most challenging things that Puro and those who are a part of the Puro community and building are trying to navigate?
Thank you, Katie. And thank you to IETA for supporting I would like to call it the European Carbon Removals Task Force, because we look at the UK as well, and everything that's going on around that. Just bear with me for a moment here. I was speaking to a friend and colleague last night, and she said, "Oh, you're not going to talk about removals again, are you, Helen?" And I said, "Yeah, sorry, I'm going to have to, but I'm actually going to talk about long-distance elite women runners."
Okay.
There's a reason for this. So, hat-trick reference. I'm looking, well, it's the London Marathon this weekend. I don't know if anyone's running it here, not me, thankfully. But if you look back to the 1980s, there was a very successful women elite runner, Ingrid Christiansen from Norway. In the 90s, there was a German lady who won it more than 3 times, Dureg Hennig. Thank you for the pronunciation, Marcus. And in the 2000s, it was Paula Radcliffe who won it 4 times. So why do I make the reference to winners per decade? Well, it makes me think, what decades have been the winners for markets, removals, and CCUS? I'm going to be controversial here. I will make it positive in the end. In my view, we had a lost decade for CCS in the 2010s. We also had a lost decade for the EU ETS. Remember, the price traded well below 10 euros for many years. And I'm wondering, sat here in 2024, if we are at risk of a lost decade for removals, and I mean all removals, not just the ones that we look at, and for the voluntary carbon market. So why are these things important? Well, markets ensure we have a level playing field, as you all know. CCUS, we talked about the uses and the storage. This is imperative to get to net zero. And then the removals deliver the net in net zero emissions. So I just wanted to sort of frame it in a kind of, let's look at the timing, and I'm happy to talk more about the international trends that we're seeing. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. And yeah, we will be circling back. Lisa DeMarco, who was on the panel earlier, killer panel with Olga and Chris and Natalie. Lisa DeMarco, elite long-distance runner. Just saying. I'm not. So, Marcus, there are a couple of things that I think you're very well prepared to catch that have been kind of teed up along the way. Most definitely, first of all, explain a bit more about the recent restructuring, right, with GE and now Vernova and what you're focused on, no longer just government affairs, strategy, but then delving a bit into just the infrastructure piece. I mean, that's your strength, that's what you're focused on, what needs to, occur, how can that the role of the markets really materialize to drive that in an expedited fashion. And also, because I don't want to fail as moderator without the time provided, but CSO. So the storage bit and the obligations piece, but it's like I know you and Paul and there's a handful of people in this space who have been thinking about it as deeply as you guys have. So Over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, and you know, with Paul ending there with a tie, you know, and what usually happens between the German and the English team then in penalty kick, I don't want to get into that. So I'm glad you asked that question, and I'll stay away from the hat trick and more sports analogy here. But to your question on GE Vernova, indeed, on April 2nd, we had our IPO. We took the old 132-year old GE, founded by Thomas Edison, apart and created 3 new standalone listed companies. Already last year in January, we spun off the healthcare business. And on April 2nd, then we separated the aviation, which is now called GE Aerospace business, from the energy portfolio of companies that we have. And that new business is now called GE Vernova. We're very excited about this because, you know, for a long, long time, we're seeing a tremendous growth opportunity with all the electrification, whether it's data centers, whether it's electrification of transport, heat pumps. That's a tremendous, you know, growth opportunity for a technology provider. And the broad portfolio that we have at a systems level, from renewables to grid to conventional power, small modular reactors. Today, roughly 30% of the electricity comes from GE machines, right? And that obviously comes with both a great responsibility in terms of also decarbonizing it, but also, as I said, a tremendous opportunity, and we're very thrilled about this. We also do acknowledge that there's no single pathway to reach net zero across countries and regions. I mean, pathways will vary depending on the local context. And as a purpose-built company, we try to and continue to develop technology that will help, you know, not only utilities, but also industrial customers and others with their decarbonization journey. And this commitment also extends beyond technology solutions and includes energy transition planning and grid modeling capabilities. And that's where I now sit with GE Vernova Consulting, where we also try to help our customers evaluate pathways to achieve net zero emissions while ensuring energy security and also reliability is given. And then also we added most recently actually a carbon management practice where we also look at how, you know, financing, leveraging market instruments can work best for these technologies. And that is where I think also, indeed, as Paul mentioned before, we are a little concerned right now with regards to the market instruments, obviously, that are there today are not helping to specifically deliver on the necessary and underpinning infrastructure, whether that is, you know, CO2 pipelines, CO2 storage, hydrogen pipelines, hydrogen storage, or power grids. You know, that is currently, I think, the biggest bottleneck, because we can think about the best certification framework that there is for a specific project. If I cannot connect it to the grid because the grid is not there, or there's no CO2 pipeline to then transport and finally store the CO2, no one's going to build a project in the first place. Right, so that's, I think, something indeed where we need to think about, and that is where I think ideas like carbon storage units or take-back obligations can really be an helpful and necessary additional, almost, yeah, asset class that we need to think about.
So can we go back to it, like just dig a bit deeper into carbon storage obligations, take-back obligations, things that maybe some, even though they are, I'm talking individuals who kind of live and breathe this space, might not be tracking as certainly heavily as you have, Paul or Marcus, but also just a very, like a fine point on the merits. Oh, what is that? Very ominous. And actually, I was going to say, and why there isn't more of, I don't know, appetite for these kinds of newer asset classes by, say, regulators or other key stakeholders, and how potentially is there an avenue to overcome this soon? Is this new?
Are we traveling in a train? We've stopped at the station. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Yeah. So take back obligation.
Yeah. So I was distracted for a second. I think we even heard from Ruben from the Commission yesterday when he talked about the ETS. The ETS is the cornerstone of EU climate policy, but he also said alongside other instruments. And I think that's where we need to think about where the markets can also play a role. And carbon storage obligations is one such instrument that can be really helpful for getting that infrastructure piece built. It's basically, there's a lot of different facets to this, but I think there's one really important one. What we've seen in a lot of deals that failed to deliver in the lost decade that Helen mentioned is this problem of counterparty risk and this project-on-project risk. Nobody's willing to invest while there's a risk of the CO2 doesn't arrive, and I've built a storage site, that's awkward, it cost me $1 billion and there's nothing to put in it, and vice versa, I've built a capture plant, but there's nowhere to get rid of that million tons a year that I need to dispose of. So this commercial piece has really been lacking, and partly it's driven by the fact that the ETS only gives an incentive to the installation that captures the CO2, and then has to stack that all the way down the chain into the storage site operator, who basically would be charging a disposal fee. Now that disposal fee has got to come out of the EU allowance price. What a carbon storage obligation can do is create a different set of incentives for storage by putting a mandate on certain parts of the economy, namely fossil fuel producers, to store carbon and be able to account for that. Now I think that's one of the challenges that I mentioned in the own goals that we're having around a lot of the climate policy at the minute, is we've got a lot of good ideas for new policy mechanisms, but the lack of understanding about what we can actually do with them and what we can say about them as organizations, as corporations, and as governments is holding back some of that investment at the minute. So I think one of the challenges we've seen with, and why there's perhaps not such support for this carbon storage obligation is a lack of understanding or concerns that, hey, well, you can't give someone a credit for capturing CO2 and then give someone a credit for storing CO2, because that's the same thing. And they're clearly two different attributes, two different actions. But so again, it comes back to that really having a clearer, more certain view of the attributes we're talking about, what the policy goal is, and how these things can fix them, instead of just having this sort of constant knee-jerk reaction that, hey, you're claiming for something that you shouldn't be doing, and trying to sort of point the finger of blame all the time before we've even done anything. I think this is really holding back European climate policy. There's a lot of, there's basically watchdogs that are seeing wolves everywhere, and I think they need to, we need to sort of manage their expectations a little bit more about not everything is a wolf. There's some good ideas in here that the industry want to get on and do these projects.
Thanks, Paul. A little nugget, again, coming from across the pond, Canada, knowing it well, that wouldn't have come up unless Ian Cora from Vera brought it up at some session I missed. But over the last year, Alberta's industrial emissions trading system that's been around since 2007, they made major modifications to their program. So not only can they generate credits for compliance under Alberta's emissions trading system, there's now storage tons and capture tons, and some of those tons can also be used for the federal clean fuel regulation, and as of a couple of weeks ago, you're talking $85 a ton under the provincial system. CFR, you're talking well north of $150 a ton. So all I'm saying, like, there are some examples that we want to always continue to riff off of, and we want to, IETA at least, play that conduit role. I want to go back to Helen, and I want to just dig a bit deeper into the CRCF. And anything else you'd like to share. But given that, unfortunately, this summit was going on at the same time as the CRCF expert group meeting, that was unfortunate. And there were some updates coming out of that with respect to methodologies and timelines, what to expect through the end of October, but also into 2025. Helen, not to get into the details necessarily of what came out of the meeting, but your Puro, like the wish list about CRCF, what they could do as one of a piece of the jigsaw puzzle to help not make this a lost decade.
Yes. And I think I'm just going to take you global again, and I just want to say thank you, Canadian government today announced procurement
You're welcome.
of removals. So we're seeing great signals from Canada and America. And also the UK. UK government has clearly signalled it wants removals in its emissions trading system. California is discussing a CDR Market Development Act. There are compliance markets which accept credits from the voluntary carbon market, such as Singapore, and the aviation market through Corsia. So I just wanted to set a scene that it's not all bad. There are really good green shoots. And then going back to the EU's carbon removal certification framework, which also has reductions within it and are very different types of units. So the one thing I would ask of the EU, and I've asked them a few times, is to give us a clear implementation roadmap, a timeline of how this will be operationalized and what the market needs. The most common question that I'm asked from our, we call them CO2 removal suppliers, they're probably more called projects, is if I'm already working in the voluntary carbon market, can I, when the CRCF becomes operational, can I flick over to the CRCF? Well, I'm assuming yes, because they're both voluntary schemes, but I don't really know yet. And does that kind of lack of clarity mean that projects might get delayed? I don't know. So what I'm asking for is, give us clarity. We don't mind what the rules are. We want to know what our role is, and there's very different bodies within the EU CRCF. And then that's when we think this will take another 2 years. So let's not forget the role of the voluntary carbon market within that time frame to deliver removals at scale and help the scaling, learning by doing and reducing those costs. So it's not stop and wait for the CRCF, it's carry on as we do normally, but then please give us clarity on what we need to do to become part of it.
I'm recognizing that we are running out of time, and I think I would love to go to the audience even just for a couple of questions. I'm going to go quickly again to Nicola and David with a few other questions, but if you are, it is a bit bright up here, but if you are kind of ready with a question or comment, just start to be prepared to put up your hand fast, and then we'll have microphones, I believe, microphone runners on both sides as usual in the plenary. So Nicola, I'd like to go back, oh, thanks. With the chemicals industry, maybe just a bit more elaboration on kind of your positioning and communications related to the EU ETS, CCU, the accounting concerns that are very real and quite prominent. Also, the international lens, you know, low carbon products and what you are seeing for certainly some of your members, the chemicals industry. And I think of it's the Climate Diplomacy Task Force that was announced, or should I say re-announced a couple of days ago here in Europe, largely focused Article 6, VCM. I don't know who saw John Podesta, the climate envoy, the replacement for John Kerry, a couple of days ago at the Columbia Energy Summit, also announced a task force for the US focused on climate and trade, largely around low carbon products, right? An alignment around low carbon products, not as much the market slant. So yeah, that's more on the accounting piece, how you're positioning it, but also internationally, what you're watching and where there could be some hooks for closer kind of collaboration alignment internationally, not necessarily for markets to be linked tomorrow, right? But down the line.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief because I also want to hear the others. Accounting is a mess. That's the short line I can I can do, because at the moment the whole accounting system for CCU in ETS doesn't work. It needs to be changed. There are signals that this will be done, but at the moment there are so many pieces of legislation in different pieces of, like something in ETS, something in the Renewable Energy Directive, a delegated act, bits and pieces that actually don't make it work. So we need to do a lot of changes to make the regulation working. And then, of course, the next question is what kind of market are we talking about, and how can we do it together with the others? Because we are talking about products which are globally traded, so there is no purpose in having a regulation which is only designed for a specific market when we are getting all the embedded materials from all other markets. So we need to find a way to work it together. We are happy to see that there is a momentum to work with other jurisdictions. The only problem is that the time horizon that we have in Europe is so short, so that good to talk with the other partners, but I would be more happy if we can start having some sort of bilateral dialogues, which is leading to something concrete that we can start building upon, rather than starting with a very top-down consensus basis we discussed in the previous session, and then we wait for another 20 years before something moves and we agree on every single detail. We need to get things moving as soon as possible.
And then David, and could I just get a show of hands if you do have a question, so I can get a read of the room, or comment? Quiet. Everybody's exhausted. That's okay. So, David, internationally, so thinking about some opportunities that you've certainly been noodling on, maybe more than many, I'd argue, and thinking about the panel prior to us with Olga, right, former head of the 6.4 SP table, right, and it was some of the removals recommendation, methodology, that kind of made things go off the rails a little bit. But you have seen some possible lines of sight, some sunlight towards opportunities with respect to these technologies, right, and international cooperation. Do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, I think one very good example was what we were trying to do with the standard setters at the COP. And from this, what I see as a very good opportunity internationally is to focus on creating a removal portfolio standard to able to bring a price to a lower point and make it affordable to companies to consider removals. Insurance. We have a very long-term durability and a high integrity product. And this product could very well be an insurance option instead of buffers to our nature-based colleagues and so on. And this way, I think we could gap the divide, which is a psychological divide between the two tribes, engineered solutions and nature-based solutions, because really we need to work together. And we can offer this, and not just as an instrument, but perhaps even technologies which operate, and in the future I think they're always going to be a utility class. When I think about our DAC plants and so on, a capacity option could be an insurance product to some other instrument to make it more affordable. And I think this is really important because demand creation, we need to find all the way how we can apply this. And we need to do it early because 20, 40, 16 years from now, Nick made a presentation yesterday that iPhone came to the market 16 years ago. We need to produce the similar growth that what the iPhone performed until today. That's a very tall order. And especially when people don't really feel yet that they need these instruments. Everybody really felt that they really need to have an iPhone. Well, that's much we need removals as we need iPhones, so.
Thank you, David. So unless there are some questions, Paul, final, the reason, oh, thank you. Yesterday, there were 3 reports. Again, I'm taking privilege, being AIDA and the moderator of our final plenary, as the summary. 3 reports, major signature pieces that AIDA released over the last 3 days. The first one was the high integrity guidelines for the voluntary carbon market. The second one was, no, I'll say the third one today was the CBAM, country reactions to CBAM. And the one yesterday was quite a detailed synthesis of industrial engineered geostorage methodologies and protocols, and a review comparing the latest, as much as we could do, the latest protocols that are currently available. So Paul, the reason I ask is it was you and Greg who had put a lot of time and effort into doing the heavy lifting for this report. So just a very quick final comment about that report and hopefully how it informs our activities across this highly, highly dynamic space.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So those of you that are interested in CCS and engineered CDR, IETA just published this amazing handbook. It tries to bring together all of the latest thinking in the market, in the VCM space, but also in the UN FCCC market. So we had to cast back our memories back to 2011 to Durban, to the agreement that was reached there around what was an acceptable and tolerable sort of legal framework in the UN context for hosting these types of activities in developing countries or the Global South under the CDM. And that was actually 17-page legal text negotiated in one COP. Well, I think it was a record at the time, maybe still is. So it's quite a detailed set of safeguards that were put in place around environment, public safety, community safety. And so what we also have in this handbook, in a second part, is what sort of environmental, social safeguards are expected for carbon storage activities, particularly in countries that don't have highly structured legal frameworks and regulatory frameworks to accommodate these projects. So that's kind of like trying to give us a few signposts to practitioners and policymakers about what we might need to expect for these activities in those countries. So yeah, happy to talk through that offline as well if anyone's interested.
Thanks for allowing us to do the final plug. Again, I just want to thank all of you for being involved over the last couple of days for this summit. Dirk, our CEO, will be sharing some wrap comments in a moment. Do you want to come up while we're still here? Okay. All right. So then could I just get a heartfelt round of applause? Thank you to the speakers, Marcus, Helen, Paul, Nicola, David. Thank you.
Hello. I just want them to have to listen to me. I'm afraid if I let you go off the stage, you'll leave. So I'd like to give you the 2 to 3 minute wrap on a really tremendous few days together here in Florence. And we say this is where carbon markets meet to drive climate action, right? And that really is what our agenda is about. It's not about the market existing for the market's sake. It's about enabling companies to do more together and to do it faster. Because we're serious about getting to net zero goals. We're serious about delivering the Paris temperature goals and the concentration goals. And it's such an enormous undertaking that really I get inspired at these kind of events because there's a different kind of an energy at a carbon market event than many other types of business events, or certainly UN events, right? Because it's people who are actually out there doing stuff in the field. It's people that actually are finding the ways to bring the finance, the policy elements, and the technology together to deliver what this group's been talking about. And anyway, I'm really inspired by all of the conversations that have taken place here. Katie, our queen of content, has already given you the rundown of the reports released this week, which really are, it's not just an achievement for us in the Secretariat, because it's really our members' views. So it's collecting the views and bringing together a synthesis about sort of at this stage of market development, where do people think we need to go, and really delivering insightful information for enabling you guys to go back home and hopefully raise more money and get more done. With that, I'm going to say, IETA's existence is really about this kind of connectivity and our firm belief that you can't kind of pick and choose what parts of the Paris Agreement you like. You've got to deliver the whole thing, including Article 6. Article 6 is sort of, in our view, the linchpin of actually making the whole thing work, about whether there's going to be enough financial resource and technology flowing to all of those abatement opportunities in the developing world that don't just happen on their own. I don't care what the critics say. You can look at the emissions each and every year, and you can say, it's not happening anyway. It somehow needs additional help. And that's where the private sector can really come into play and can really help deliver on those goals. So with that, I hope you take something away from this. I'm sure you've got a pocket full of business cards, so you've got some contacts. I hope you've got some inspiration, and I hope you've got some really good ideas as you leave this event. I need to thank a few people. First of all, the volunteers that we extremely were grateful to have from several universities, from the University of Dublin, Edinburgh and Yale University, who have been running microphones. They've been getting you registered. They've been hopefully answering questions. And I'm sure they've been passing out resumes. Otherwise, they aren't doing their job. But I'm really grateful to all of you guys. And next to our amazing set of speakers and sponsors. Obviously, this isn't possible to do this without extreme help on the sponsorship front. So if you haven't had the privilege of sponsoring an IETA event, you've got to talk to Lisa Spafford, because she'll have a form for you to sign. But we really do rely on your support for this. And then finally, certainly, the IETA staff and the audiovisual team upstairs that's kept us looking great up here. Thank you guys for the tremendous support in putting this program together. Lisa, Awa, Christian, the whole conference team, we really appreciate your help. Can we give them a round of applause? And somehow I kind of feel like we ought to thank our Italian hosts, all of you from Italy, that, I'm kidding. But we really do appreciate getting a chance to come to Italy and spend some time in this wonderful city. So the last thing is, we're going to see you next year at the European Climate Summit in Barcelona in early April. But between now and then, it's Cartagena at the end of June. It's Berlin with Innovate for Climate in September. It's New York Climate Week at the end of September. It's our Asia Climate Summit in Delhi coming up in October, and then, of course, Baku, the COP in Baku. So we're on a journey together. Look forward to seeing you there, and let's keep our spirits high and keep the investment flowing, because we've got a big job ahead of us. Thank you.